I used to think crossing certain lines was something other people did, people whose lives were worlds away from my calm, settled routine. But life has a way of surprising you when you're least expecting it. This is my confession. I'm Eleanor, 48 years old, and by most outside measures, I had it all figured out. My husband, Victor, and I were nearing our 20th wedding anniversary. We owned a modest townhouse at the edge of the city, and I managed a local bookstore, a quaint little place that smelled of aged paper and espresso from the adjoining cafe. We never had children. We initially said it was a conscious decision, wanting to travel and invest time in our careers, but then we simply got used to not changing anything. Over the years, that carefully maintained life turned oddly silent, like a house where the lights are on but no one's truly awake inside. Victor and I slid into a pattern that was almost comically predictable. We rose at the same time each morning, 6:30 sharp, he to watch the news, me to do some light stretches in the living room, side by side but worlds apart. We exchanged quick pecks on the cheek and words like "don't forget the dry cleaning," or "we're out of coffee beans." When we first married, we'd promised each other a lifetime of curiosity, frequent trips, spontaneous dates, maybe even a small business together one day. But the bigger dreams got boxed away as we focused on the day-to-day. I think we both believed that routine was the mark of a stable marriage. Maybe that's true for some. For me, though, I began sensing a quiet ache whenever I let my thoughts wander. One day, a friend suggested I join a volunteer reading program at the local community center. I love books, so I figured it would be a simple extension of my life at the bookstore, leading reading circles, recommending novels to folks who might appreciate them. That's when I crossed paths with Jonah.
He was around my age, or maybe a shade younger, leading creative writing workshops as part of the program. The first time I saw him, I was struck by how animated he became when he spoke of literature, how passionately he encouraged even the shyest participants to share a poem or story. I chalked it up to professional admiration, though I noted a spark of interest in how he'd glance my way during group discussions. When the session ended, I was organizing leftover papers on a table. Jonah came over, complimented my reading list, asked if I'd read a certain contemporary author. We fell into a surprisingly easy chat about modern fiction, a topic I rarely indulged in at home with Victor. My husband had never been big on reading, so I usually kept my bookstore stories to myself, but Jonah's eyes lit up whenever I mentioned a book that moved me, and I found it refreshing, like stepping into a warm patch of sunlight. By the time we parted that afternoon, I had a sense of having shared something personal, even though we'd only talked about books. In the weeks that followed, Jonah and I discovered more overlaps. We both tinkered with our own writing in private journals, both found nature walks therapeutic, both felt drawn to quiet corners of the city where you could still see traces of the old architecture. We exchanged phone numbers under the pretext of coordinating volunteer schedules. Soon enough, we were texting a few times a week, light messages about new novels or upcoming workshops. I told myself it was purely collegial, yet each buzz of my phone sent a small thrill through me, a reminder that someone out there was genuinely eager to talk with me. Victor remained oblivious. Our marriage had fallen into a pattern of polite cohabitation. We rarely argued, but we rarely laughed together either. Once in a while, I'd attempt to spark conversation, asking if he wanted to try a new restaurant or if he'd heard about an upcoming art exhibit. He'd politely say, "maybe next time," then vanish behind his phone or the TV. Some nights, I'd lie awake, watching the digital clock tick, tears pooling in my eyes as I felt him sleeping just inches away, yet emotionally distant as the moon. Then came the day of a big community center event, an all-day festival combining reading circles, writing workshops, and performances. Victor was busy with a work conference, so I told him I'd be gone most of the day. He offered no objection. I spent the morning helping set up booths, rearranging chairs, distributing flyers. Jonah arrived mid-morning, flashing me a friendly grin from across the room. Together, we coordinated the event schedule, joked about how chaotic the day would be. Amid the bustle, It felt natural, no time for deeper conversation. But when the evening wrapped up, we found ourselves alone in the main hall, folding tables away while the last participants trickled out. Rain began tapping on the windows, and a staff member locked up, leaving us as the final two volunteers inside. We decided to share a cab rather than brave the downpour separately. But cabs were scarce that night, so we stepped outside, huddled under the building's awning, waiting. We chatted about the success of the event and the creative writing pieces we'd heard. A comfortable hush fell, and I sensed a current running between us. The sound of rain and distant traffic set a stage of quiet intimacy. Jonah made a half-joke about how we deserved a celebratory coffee. I smiled, and before logic could intervene, I agreed that coffee sounded nice. We ended up in a small cafe that was thankfully still open, the door jingling behind us. We ordered drinks, sat at a corner table, and let the conversation flow from the day's triumphs to more personal territory. His divorce a few years prior, my frustration at being in a stagnant marriage. I spoke quietly, aware that the barista might overhear. But it felt liberating to voice how lonely I'd become in a relationship that once brimmed with promise. Jonah listened with empathy, occasionally offering gentle remarks about how it was never too late to seek change or revitalization. I found my eyes welling with tears, ashamed at how easily I was confiding in someone who wasn't my husband. Yet I craved this connection so desperately. When the cafe closed, we stood outside under a flickering street lamp, the rain reduced to a drizzle. He hesitated, as if wanting to say something. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears, half expecting him to invite me somewhere else. But he simply thanked me for the evening, then softly admitted, "It's hard, seeing someone like you feel so unappreciated." My breath caught. I responded with a tearful smile, unsure whether to hug him goodbye or keep it formal. We ended up hugging, longer than a casual goodbye, but not so overt that we attracted stares. Even that small closeness sent waves of emotion through me. I went home in a haze, drenched in guilt and a strange sense of hope. Over the next days, Jonah and I texted more often, exchanging jokes, comforting each other about minor daily stresses. Meanwhile, Victor carried on with his life, noticing only that I seemed distracted. If he pressed me, I'd mumble something about being tired from extra volunteer shifts. He never pressed too hard. It hurt, realizing how easily I could hide major emotional shifts from the man I'd shared a bed with for 2 decades. Our house felt like a place where routine overshadowed any deeper connection. A week later, Jonah and I found ourselves alone again after a volunteer session ended early due to a scheduling mishap. We decided to grab lunch and ended up strolling around a local park, somewhere I rarely went with Victor. We sat on a bench, watching children play on the swings, and I confessed how I'd once envisioned a family life, but then let that dream slip away. Jonah revealed that he'd thought about having kids with his ex, but it never came to fruition. The sadness in both our voices was palpable, drawing us closer in an unspoken bond of unfulfilled desires. Suddenly, a drizzle began, and we dashed for the nearest gazebo. The laughter from running in the light rain turned into a softer, more intimate moment once we were sheltered. I realized then how easily I could reach for his hand, and how badly I wanted to. Our closeness continued escalating in subtle ways. Small touches on the arm, deeper eye contact, lingers in conversation that left no doubt about the tension beneath. Yet we both danced around the line, as though acknowledging it would break the spell. That unspoken tension finally shattered one late afternoon at my bookstore. He'd dropped by to deliver some materials for the community center, and the staff had already left for the day. We were reorganizing old stock in a cramped back room. Standing shoulder to shoulder, dust swirling in the light from a single overhead lamp, we paused. Our eyes met, and in that electric stillness, we both knew. The kiss that followed was tentative but fierce with pent-up longing. My mind screamed warnings about marriage vows, about how I'd become the person I'd always judged. But in that instant, my heart drowned out every alarm. We broke apart, breathless, staring at each other in shock. He started to apologize, stammering that this was wrong, that he didn't want to hurt me or sabotage my marriage. I felt tears pushing at the corners of my eyes, whispering that I didn't know how to handle these feelings. Yet neither of us walked away. I ended up clinging to him in a silent admission that we couldn't turn back now. The hours and days after that moment felt dreamlike. I tried to pretend everything was normal with Victor. We ate dinner, watched TV, went to bed, but I was constantly replaying the memory of Jonah's closeness. My guilt became nearly unbearable. I resolved to end it, to focus on my marriage. But each time Jonah texted, I melted, responding with a desperate hope that we could at least talk. Talking led to confessions, which led to stolen meetings and more kisses. Our emotional bond grew until physical closeness felt almost inevitable. I started telling lies to Victor more brazenly. I'm staying late at work. I have an early volunteer meeting. I promised a friend I'd help with her garage sale. The weight of these deceptions was crushing, yet I clung to the fleeting sense of being genuinely wanted, something I hadn't felt from Victor in so long that I'd almost forgotten it was possible. Jonah, for his part, expressed guilt too, admitting he feared being the cause of tearing my life apart. But we couldn't resist. Eventually, the facade cracked. Victor noticed missed calls on my phone from Jonah's number. He confronted me on a Sunday morning, eyes stormy with betrayal, demanding answers. I tried to deny everything, but the evidence was glaring. He recognized Jonah's name from the volunteer rosters I'd mentioned weeks ago. The confrontation turned raw, both of us shouting through tears. I tried to explain how lonely I'd been, how I never meant to hurt him, but it only sounded like excuses. He stormed out, slamming the front door, leaving me trembling on the living room floor. Jonah texted, asking if I was okay. I told him what happened in fragmented lines, crying so hard I could barely see. He offered to meet me anywhere, to support me. Part of me wanted to see him that instant. The other part felt I'd done enough damage. I locked myself in the bedroom, gazing at old photographs of me and Victor on our honeymoon, smiling in a glow of youth and promise. How had we let that bright flame fade to embers? Victor returned later, collecting some clothes. We spoke in tense whispers. He said he might need time at a friend's place, that he didn't know if he could trust me anymore. I stood numb, wishing I could rewind to a point before all this. Yet even then, I knew the dissatisfaction had set in long before Jonah appeared. Jonah was a catalyst, not the sole cause. After Victor left, I collapsed onto the bed, sobbing into a pillow. Now, weeks later, I'm in a state of limbo. Victor and I have exchanged cold, practical messages about mortgage payments and scheduling a meeting with a marriage counselor. He hasn't confirmed if he really wants counseling or just wants to finalize a separation. Jonah remains in my life, cautious yet caring. We've met quietly a few times, always overshadowed by guilt and the knowledge that my marriage is teetering. Part of me believes the love I found with Jonah is genuine, that it revived something essential in me. Another part wonders if I used him to escape a conversation I should have had with Victor years ago. My heart splits each time I see how much pain I inflicted upon a man who once meant everything to me. I'm nearing 49, uncertain which direction to choose. Some nights I imagine fighting for my marriage, trying therapy, or a renewed commitment. Other nights, I picture building a fresh life with Jonah, forging new memories that aren't tied to the mundane routine that suffocated me. And sometimes I think perhaps I should step away from both, find myself beyond the shadow of any man, reevaluating the person I've become after decades of letting my passions slip away. I share this story not to justify my actions, but to highlight how silence within a marriage can be as corrosive as open conflict. When the heart languishes unacknowledged, it will seek light elsewhere, even if it means shattering vows once held sacred. My name is Eleanor, and I never believed I'd be the one to betray a steady, albeit bland, life with Victor. Yet here I stand, on the verge of losing my marriage, uncertain if Jonah and I have the foundation to survive this storm. I only know I can't return to the hush that defined my life before, even if this path leads through heartbreak.